The hat I would put on is more of the Taylor Swift hat, which is understand what the market needs, figure out what gives you leverage, and constantly innovate new formats as the format of the media and the technology change.
Welcome to AI Truth Serum, your antidote to the hype and doom of AI. I'm Greg Shove. I'm your host, seven-time founder and CEO of an AI company called Section AI. Makes sense, right? Every episode, I talk to people smarter than me about AI and its impact on how we live and work. And this week, I'm talking with Sangeet Choudary, the best-selling author and AI strategist who's been called a must-read by Harvard Business Review. His books include Platform Revolution and his new book, Reshuffle, which this year was awarded the Thinkers 50 Strategy Award for the most impactful idea in the field of strategy. Sangeet advises CEOs at dozens of Fortune 500 companies and private equity firms. And he thinks we are getting AI all wrong. So our conversation today is to help us figure out how to get it right. Sangeet, great to see you again. Where are you today?
I'm in Dubai right now.
You're in Dubai. And is that where you live?
I'm based in Dubai, yes.
Is the AI hype bubble, craziness as strong in Dubai as it is here in the US?
I think it's a very different flavor over here because it's seen as a lever for national competitiveness. A lot of my work with clients is still in the US, but if you think about it geopolitically, for the UAE, which Dubai is a part of, AI presents an opportunity to kind of fuse your oil-based value chain into digital services value chain for the first time. And so instead of exporting oil, they can now convert that oil into AI services and export that. So they're really focused on building that stack and use cheap oil to kind of help fuel that.
So that mean the hype is even greater, or like the intensity is even greater, or the same? Or what's your I'm just curious. What's the vibe?
I think it's a little different in the sense of there's less of an ecosystem level hype. There's more of a very clear top-down capital push towards AI infrastructure out here. So you would have heard of Falcon and G42, and so it's really about owning the infrastructure, the layers over here, irrespective of where the final services get built. You want to tax that activity.
We'll go back a little bit first to go forward. So let's go back. You had some real jobs back in the day. You worked for Intuit, you worked for Yahoo, you worked for Santander. And then really the last, I think, 10 or so years, you've been advising others and really helping companies and organizations. And you wrote a best-selling book about platforms. So why don't you start us there? How did you sort of get into the platform business? And then we can sort of update as relates to AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've really had two real jobs, if you will. So Yahoo and Intuit, and that ended in 2012. While I was at those jobs, I figured that I liked answering the more abstract questions. And I figured that the rate at which those abstract questions were changing and were becoming more relevant to strategy was increasing because of how things were changing with digital. That was 2008 to 2012. That was really the confluence of the social web, the smartphone revolution, cloud computing. So the nature of business and strategy was fundamentally changing. The question that I felt was not answered really well was, when these technological shifts happen, as was happening with social, mobile, and cloud at that point in time, what determines the new winners and the new losers? It's not just about using technology to get better at playing yesterday's game. It's typically a complete change in the game. And so how do you then identify that game? How do you set the game so that you get a head start in setting the rules for others and they play on your playing field? So those were the types of questions that I was kind of fascinated by. Spent some time with the MIT Center for Digital Business to start crystallizing all of this. And so my initial framing was that we're really moving from a world of linear business models called pipelines to platform business models, which are more connected, data-rich, organizing markets of activity. And even with my current work with AI and Reshuffle, the question is still the same. I bring the same lens, which is you can't just think about AI in terms of speeding up, improving your existing game. You have to reimagine your game and rethink the playing field.
So that's what we're going to talk about, I think, a lot this morning. And you wrote a book, obviously, this past year, Reshuffle, Who Wins When AI Restacks the Knowledge Economy. So is that what's starting to go on?
We haven't suddenly gone from a pre-AI era to an AI era. We've progressed through a sequence of technologies that have changed several aspects of how business works. So if I sort of break down those constituent aspects. One thing that's changed is where you think about integrating your business versus where you think about changing the structure of the industry by modularizing it. So one way to think about it is how the cloud modularized different parts of the value chain. So you could rent a capability from Twilio, you could rent a capability from Stripe, but then with AI coming in, you could start modularizing things that were traditionally associated with tacit knowledge. So you could now modularize a segment of knowledge and make it available as a model. And so the fact that you can now essentially rent capabilities, just like you could rent a Stripe or the Twilio with an API call. You can now rent knowledge work or the performance of certain forms of knowledge work with a well-structured prompt. That changes the structure of business. So one is, it changes the question of what is the nature of the business in terms of which capabilities are critical to the business versus which ones you can get from outside, which then changes the second thing about business, which is that if you start renting capabilities from outside, clearly you can't compete on the basis of them because they're available to everybody else in the industry as well. So those capabilities have essentially become commoditized. Now you have two options. You can either figure out which capabilities are not commoditized and build your differentiation around that, or you can combine these commoditized capabilities from elsewhere to solve new customer problems in a fundamentally new way, which is what I call rebundling. And that then brings us to a third issue as well, which is that if certain capabilities that you were competing on, say you were a law firm and the ability to process legal documents was one of the capabilities for which you hired and hoarded talent internally, and now that capability is easily available externally, you now have to think about your core capability getting commoditized. So what's the new place where value has moved? Because value will typically move somewhere else. If this is commoditized, another activity in the value chain will become more valuable.
So Sangeet, let's go back a bit and build some building blocks here, and then we'll get to the reinvention part, assuming we can get that far. So renting intelligence, let's just start there, because that seems just like a fundamental sort of principle of the era that we're now in, that we can now rent intelligence, obviously from, I guess we'd call them AI cloud. So we can rent this intelligence. So let's start there. Is this intelligence good enough today?
Well, if you think of AI as not performing knowledge work or not performing entire workflows, which is what is being sold to a lot of enterprises, agentic workflows, you can fundamentally remove the need for human intervention and you can speed up workflows. The problem is when we're selling speed, we're looking for opportunities to completely remove all friction. Whereas where we are with AI today is that it performs some forms of knowledge work within certain considerations well. And that's not too different from how we used to manage work in the past. We would have people with different levels of skills, and depending on the level of skill that we had, oversight and governance would increase. And again, depending on the stakes that were involved and the extent to which you could tolerate failure, the level of governance would change. So I think where we're seeing a mismanagement or mismatch today is that we're not focusing on execution, governance, and risk, that trifecta. We're focused entirely on how can we cut costs because we can fundamentally rewire the execution around agentic capabilities. And when we take our eye off that execution, governance, risk trifecta, and we end up overselling execution, that's when all these reactions from executives or pushback from executives come in as well. The other issue over here also is...
But hold sec. But just for the audience, is in your mind AI good enough today to be renting intelligence from the cloud? That's my first question.
Yeah, I think it is. It depends on how well you structure the workflow to manage these three things, but yes, it is.
Okay, so my next question is, how should leaders and or the rest of the organization convince themselves of that? How do you get enough people sort of convinced that these capabilities today are ready for some amount of prime time?
Well, in my experience, the reason there's even a need to convince on these parameters is because we have what Ethan Mollick calls the jagged frontier of AI. So it's really good at certain things and really bad at others. But the people who are selling it, both externally as vendors and internally as champions of this technology, are overselling it and often applying it in places where it either should not be applied, or in order for it to be applied, it needs to be done in the context of the governance and risk involved over there. And that's not happening. So I think the real challenge is that we're talking about something which is not a deterministic input-output machine at a very horizontal level and saying AI is going to solve this, AI is going to solve that. And you could talk in that manner about very fixed deterministic machines, but you can't talk about AI like that. And that's the real problem. It has to be much more nuanced in terms of where that applies and with what conditions.
Okay, so if I'm an executive and I believe the AI is good enough to, to be rented, if you will, this intelligence can be rented and injected into my organization, what you're saying is the first watch out is maybe my internal AI champions and all the vendors have drunk too much Kool-Aid, and I need to be more thoughtful around the projects that I pick to inject AI in. Like, walk me through what's next. I'm on board. I'm willing to buy it. What do I do now?
Well, I think the first thing that should be done is to understand clearly a trade-off between where is there a productivity gain that we can unlock and where is there risk associated with deploying AI, and identify. First of all, it's about prioritizing and identifying use cases where the productivity gain is significantly high and the risk that needs to be managed is significantly low. Because if you're not playing in that quadrant, if you're starting in one of the other quadrants, you're setting yourself up to either be disappointed or you're going to see failures because you're racking up risks. So the first thing is prioritize over there. The second thing is really very clearly think about the architecture of the workflow with these constraints in mind. What is the nature of risk I'm willing to bear with AI coming in? Does it go beyond my risk tolerance? If so, how do I bring it back within my risk tolerance? Think about all of these factors. Don't come at it from a cost-cutting perspective, because you can do that with a deterministic solution. But with AI, I think that's the wrong hat to have on.
So is it the wrong hat because you're saying there's bigger gains with a different strategy or a hat, or is it that AI can't do it? Like what I'm telling my organization, and frankly what we're advising our clients, is that they should enable every employee with best of class AI and give it to every employee, and then of course coach them and train them and encourage them, which most organizations don't do, and we can talk about that. But are you saying don't do that? Are you saying that you'll get some gain, but it's not the real gain? Do you agree that organizations should be doing that?
Yeah, I think they should absolutely be doing that. You need to use the tool, you need to understand the capabilities of the tool, but you need to then reimagine your work by being much more outcome focused rather than execution focused. The wrong way to use AI is to say, this is what I do, and I'm just going to speed up a couple of tasks over here, which then help me save a certain number of hours. But I would really say that the right way to roll it out across the organization is to give every employee the right level of agency to reimagine their role, reimagine their position within the team, their input into the workflow that they're currently working on, and essentially create a learning organization that constantly learns from each other's adoption of AI to constantly question, what should this workflow look like? Should we even be gunning for the same outcomes? Because perhaps we were looking for those outcomes because of the constraints we were operating in the past. If we now have access to this rentable, cheap intelligence, can we just do it another way? So you have to think about re-architecting workflows. I think that's my main point.
Hold sec. I want to get there in a minute. I want to stay with this first step, right? Or this, which is, to adopt AI and deploy them into their workflows. It's not going well, though. What I experience when I'm on the road talking to clients and prospects is that some are seeing a lot of success, and I am seeing 75, 80% adoption, weekly or monthly active usage of these new technologies. But I'm also seeing a lot of organizations, and the data, including some recent US Census data, would imply a lot of organizations stalling out at 10%, 11, 12, 13% adoption, let's say, of an enterprise LLM. Why do you think that's happening? What's going on right now? And is this what you're seeing?
My experience is sort of self-selected based on the type of teams that I work with. In a lot of cases, I'm working with the parts of the organization which is thinking about reinventing themselves. So they are thinking about reinventing not just the organization, but also how they do things internally, how should they organize, how they approach, their work, even think about what the outcome or the business model should be based around which they structure their work.
So you're picky with your clients. You pick the ones that are already committed and are all in. So they have high levels of adoption already, you're saying, when you start to work with them.
I think they have high levels of agency in terms of how to think about it. They're not responding to a bureaucratic push of you need to adopt X percentage of AI into your tasks and reduce Y% of your time. So I think where you have those kinds of narratives, that's where you're sort of killing the reimagination of the work. That's my experience is self-selected based on that.
Yep, no, makes sense. So let's now move to really the thesis in your new book, Reshuffle. And I'm going to read the subhead of the first chapter, What If We've Been Getting AI All Wrong, which is obviously a provocative way to start the book. Tell us more.
Yeah, the reason I wrote this book is exactly that. What if we've been getting AI all wrong? I say that because of three different reasons. The first is we have this obsession with intelligence, which I call the intelligence distraction. So we are focused too much on whether we have a fifth grader or a PhD in our pocket, and what kinds of exams and benchmarks can they clear. And we're less focused on the fact that whether AI improves beyond this or not, even its current capabilities are not adequately deployed across the organization. So there's an excess of supply of intelligence. The constraint is on the demand side and seeing how to apply it, where to apply it, how to see the returns on it. That whole piece is unanswered. So my first point is that let's look away from intelligence to the larger system within which it's deployed and understand how organizational systems, workflows, etc. work. The second thing that I'm then saying is that we often end up focusing too much on using AI to do things better, faster, cheaper. And that's the automation optimization narrative. When we have the ability to get actual work done, which is really the promise of agentic execution in general, we should be thinking about reimagining what that work should be rather than just thinking about doing things better, faster, cheaper. Which brings us to the third point is that it's not just at the level of workflows and tasks that AI has an impact. AI changes how companies compete because value shifts. AI changes which kinds of capabilities will accordingly be valued in the new model of competition, and hence AI will change not just jobs but also the organizational structures that will be set up. And so my point is, if we really are to see the long-term benefits of AI, and the long term doesn't have to be 5-7 years, given the rate of adoption and the pace of improvement, it will be much shorter. In order to see that, we can't just focus on doing things better, faster, cheaper. We have to move beyond that. And that's really the crux of the book.
Yeah. And so, again, advice to leaders who are listening, should they do this in parallel, meaning go get those efficiency gains, those productivity gains, by enabling employees to reinvent their workflows and outsource some tasks and so on. And at the same time, so start the work of this reinvention, like what will my business be, or what is the new business that I can invent? Do you think about these things as two different work streams, if you will, or paths, and we should go down both at the same time?
No, I think we should go down both at the same time, but it's really a question of what's central and what's peripheral. And what I mean by that is understanding how to use AI and what its capabilities are, becoming AI literate. That's very central because that's table stakes. In order for you to reimagine anything, you need to understand what are the capabilities of the tool you're playing with. Alongside that, as you understand how to use AI, you will anyway see ways to find productivity in your existing workflow. But my point is, don't put your blinders on and just get excited about that. Keep getting better at using AI, but constantly have your focus on how can I reimagine what my team does, what I do, what my organization does using these capabilities. So I would say that the productivity gains will be an automatic fallout of just getting better at understanding what you have at your service. But if you just focus on that, you're going to miss where the real opportunity lies.
And then how do you actually do that? Meaning, how do you think about reinventing your future with AI? Is this like, yeah, okay, go hire a consultant. Obviously, the Fortune 500 will use McKinsey or Bain or BCG, and maybe a team might call you or some other expert. Or is it like you run a war game scenario internally? How do you actually do this? And what's the process someone should be going through right now?
So the first thing that I'll just call out is that for companies that use AI well, whether it is today's generative AI or even, analytical and predictive AI in the past, the companies that really do it well and rethink an AI native organization, the first thing that they do is that they don't rely on some episodic one-off planning cycles and learning cycles. They create a continuously planning and learning organization. So you can't sit once a year and plan for the next year and then not think about it anytime in between. You have to constantly keep improving that, whatever map you've created. So I think what's more important than plans in today's world is sense making. And you have to continuously do sense making based on all the information that you're gathering. So the first thing is that in order for you to reimagine anything, it has to be a continuously learning process. You have to do it at your individual level, but you have to create an organization that does that as well. The second thing is that we are not talking about plan and a way to get there as much as we're talking about a clear vision of what's your bet going to be in terms of what's your industry going to look like 1 year from now, what is your position in the industry going to look like, and in order to get to that winning position, what needs to change from where you are today. And you have to keep refining those bets based on what you're learning. So you need to really think in terms of bets rather than in terms of plans. And through a process of constantly learning and sense making, you improve your ability to make those bets.
Okay, what the hell is sense making? I mean, it sounds expensive, but what is sense making?
Sense making is essentially, for want of a better word, I'll just use the term game. What's the nature of the game your organization plays today? Now, if you're seeing that logic is changing, that game is changing, you have to first of all make sense of why it's changing. What are the new kinds of games that are going to be played which will solve the same problem or actually eliminate the need for solving that problem? So what are these new forms of, I won't say competition, but alternatives that are coming and attacking the pockets that you used to get fed from? How are customers finding fundamentally new solutions? So that's all of that is part of sense making. You need to make a map of how things are changing around you, and you need to place bets on what you're seeing around, which of those things are here to stay. If I just take another example from 10 years back, fintechs were all over the place and they were chipping away at the banks. But eventually only a few fintechs survived because they used that initial wedge to expand across the customer journey or expand across the value chain. Banks that tried to emulate the fintechs did not necessarily succeed, but those that figured out how certain fintechs like Square and Stripe reorganized their architecture, they were the ones who were able to understand how to respond to what was happening. So that's what I think of as sense making. It is expensive.
Yeah, I get it. It is expensive. Okay, I want to be in that business. You made a really important point, though, Sangeet. I think that we are underestimating this potential for what I call jumping capability boundaries. When I think about renting intelligence, what I see happening is, and you referenced this, suppliers can become competitors. The AI suppliers could become competitors. Individuals can jump their capability boundaries. When I think about sense making, I think about it that way. The filter would be, who can jump their capability boundaries, both inside my organization, but also in terms of kind of my ecosystem, in terms of my business. I still think it's hard, Sangeet. It's really hard. Most people want to fast follow. I think the reality of most executives, most leaders, they really want to fast follow, which seems hard, really hard in this moment. And it's changing so fast. So even if I follow someone, maybe they're not the winner and I'm following the wrong guy. What's your take on that?
I think the first thing I'll call out is that what you said is precisely a very elegant way to think about what's happening. The reason we really need to do sense making is because the structure is not stable. You talked about boundaries. You talked about that's what gave it a sense of structure, whether it's our jobs or our companies or our industries. When structure is up for questioning and is up for grabs, better execution does not solve the problem. What to execute towards is more important than how to execute better. Going to your other point, I absolutely believe that it makes a lot of sense to be a fast follower. But in order to be a fast follower, you need to be clear about what you are following. You need to train yourself to find early signs. Very often, the players who get the arrows on the back are giving you early signs. So you need to train yourself to figure out which early signs to pay attention to, which early signs make sense versus not. And so what I really advocate in the book is that look for changes in structure. Going back to your point, look for changes in structure. Look for where value used to be versus it's moving somewhere else. Look for capabilities crossing boundaries. Look for, an entrepreneur building a certain kind of business that could not have been built in the past because they got access to a certain set of capabilities for the first time. So look for those early signs and think about what that means for you. Don't look for operational improvements, only look for structural changes and be a fast follower. I would absolutely agree that during periods of uncertainty, there's a lot of risk with doubling down as the first mover every time. What really matters more is if you can find 5 different lessons from 5 different places, all of them validated, but not successful, but when combined together in a new way using your existing assets, and that helps you become successful. I think that's the fast follower map for me.
You make the point, I think, in the book or your other writing, that incumbents can move fast, but moving fast is often not enough. That even if an incumbent or a legacy firm can build that product or service, but someone might be disrupting them not on the product, but on the business model. And I'm curious how you think about not just product or service innovation, but also business model innovation. Is this what you're getting at, which is that AI will create new business models? And that, to me, is what legacy firms or incumbents really struggle to react to. They can react to the product innovation, but they really have a hard time reacting to business model innovation. So what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very much a point about business model innovation. One further nuance I'll just unpeel over there is that very often we think about business model innovation in a customer centric way, find a fundamentally new way to serve a customer problem. But when technological shifts happen, business model innovation is also about changing the nature of how capabilities are organized in your industry and what problem they can solve. An example to make this real is when you think of Adobe and Figma. When the shift to the cloud happened, Adobe was hailed as a company that managed that shift very well, and it moved from selling licenses to selling subscriptions. And so it did that channel shift and revenue model shift really, really well. But what Figma did was it created a fundamentally different business model because it was structured around the capabilities that the cloud offered. Because Adobe was structured around the desktop or monolithic software based model where you created software to focus on getting a certain task done really well, in this case design. Figma was structured around the logic of the cloud, which is that you could do not just individual tasks but entire workflows. But more importantly, design is not an isolated task. It's an input into many other tasks in an organizational workflow: product, marketing, sales, etc. And if you can manage individual elements across an organization's design files, you can govern design at an organization-wide scale, and that's what organizations need alongside task execution. So Adobe simply could not build a governance-based model because it was structured around a different technological capability, and Figma was structured around a new one. And so that's my key point, that when technological shifts happen, you have to identify what's the new business model that can be enabled around these new capabilities.
And so let's update the story. What's your prediction about AI's impact on Figma? How does Figma get disrupted?
Well, in one way, I would say that Figma is better suited to play with AI because you can enhance the governance story even further. The way I would think of Figma getting disrupted is if you could eventually create an AI native solution where the fidelity of design is not compromised. So today, the assumption that Figma is based on is human execution with human governance, and it can move towards human execution with AI governance very easily by layering it on top, because AI is already good enough at solving the governance problem, but it's probably not
Yep.
as good as solving the design fidelity problem. And so a player that can come in and solve that could potentially disrupt it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think that whole creative services, industry or industries, that would be everything from Hollywood, entertainment, media, to sort of agency, creative services, marketing services. That feels like, to me, just about to get blown up. So disrupted in terms of business models and how the work gets done. Some combination of just automation, maybe what you would consider more tactical deployment of AI, and then much more seriously around business model and how clients pay for it. Not just for creative services, but all knowledge work will start to demand for built-in contractual price decreases. I mean, this has been happening, as you know, in manufacturing for 25 years, right? Clients are buying from vendors on long-term contracts, and we're building in price decreases every year on the assumption that the vendor would get efficiencies from automation. I think that's about to, if it's already happening, I know, in knowledge work. I think large clients who are buying over a multi-year agreement are going to start to demand built-in price decreases over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of the services or knowledge work that they're getting. That's our reality for people who are selling knowledge work. They better get ready for it. Clients will drive this change. If the organization doesn't want to drive it, I think clients drive it.
I think that's already happening. We've seen this before in other models. Obviously, you mentioned that whenever automation comes in, you see eventually that margin compression. And typically, there are at least two effects that play out, second order effects, if you will. The first is that once the margin compresses beyond a point, it becomes difficult to sustain highly specialized firms. You then start seeing consolidation, so that even if that particular part of the workflow is margin compressed, by capturing enough of the adjacencies in the workflow, you can find certain constraints which are still margin expanding. And so that becomes a viable model. So you'll see new forms of consolidation, vertical integration to make that happen. The second thing that we often see is that mediocrity gets increasingly punished, because even if AI does not take away your job through automation, it takes away your skill premium by leveling everybody up equally. So mediocrity gets punished. And what happens in that case is you end up with a bit of a superstar economy where being exceptional gets paid exceptionally high rates, because the ability to help clients unlock something that cannot be unlocked using AI will become a source of human premium, but not everybody would be able to capture that. We see that in a lot of the creative industries already with commoditization of distribution advantages that were there, but we'll see that even more with commoditization of these creation advantages.
Yeah, let's spend a little bit more time there, because I think this is a really important point, Sangeet, that humans, some humans, maybe not many, maybe not enough when you think about the broader economy, but some humans are going to be much more valuable,
right?
Basically, right? And it feels like to me, the organization owns some responsibility to train its humans and to develop their talent. I know you've done a lot of talent development in your career. It also feels like to me, though, the reality is that we own that ourselves, right? That our own skills and our own capabilities. It just feels like you're going to have to be in the top 20% or 10% or 5%. I don't think it's that hard to be in the top 5 or 10% of an organization or a team or of a function, but I think you're going to have to do it. And I think you will be rewarded, to your point. I think there'll be a real premium for the best humans. There certainly are in every other aspect of endeavor, like sports and entertainment and so on. It feels like that's what's coming to knowledge work.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, because I really like this quote by Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, who says that, well, there are things like sports with very fixed rules. To be in the top 1% is very difficult, but doing what he did not try to be in the top 1% on a particular skill. He tried to find two things that did not intersect and made them intersect, which was commenting on office politics and doing it with a cartoon. Being in the top 1% over there is a lot simpler. And I think there's a lot of insight over there, because as more and more things become commoditized, the advantage will shift to completely connecting different disciplines, using these commoditized capabilities to give you leverage and scale. But what helps you differentiate yourself and what helps you capture the market and get those superstar returns is really the ability to play at a certain intersection, connect things that have previously not been connected, and benefit from that innovation. So the hat I would put on is less somebody beating the 100-mile record and more of the Taylor Swift hat, which is understand what the market needs, figure out what gives you leverage, and constantly innovate new formats as the format of the media and the technology change.
I love that idea. I love that analogy of or advice, I guess. Combine two previously maybe uncombined, right? Unrelated skills or capabilities, or even data plus something. Like combine two things that aren't combined today into something of more unique value. What you also said, just to remind everybody, is don't be mediocre. And if your margin starts to compress, you better bulk up, consolidate, get enough margin basically through volume, or you're going to have to specialize further, as we're just talking about, become a superstar, whether you're a firm or an individual. Sangeet, let's zoom out as we start to wrap up. This is all about AI truth serum. So let's talk some truth, or at least predict some truth about what's ahead for us. What is your level of concern around the dislocation of knowledge work and the impact of these technologies? And let's keep the time horizon sort of under 5 years, more like 3. What's your level of concern in terms of the pace of these technologies, in terms of their improvement and the impact on work, particularly early career work?
Yeah, I think the factors that make me concerned are less about the performance of knowledge work itself and more about the level of agency that most workers have over their career and the level of creative capacity that they put towards it in terms of imagining their path. Because traditionally, a lot of us in general have thought of institutional support along our career, whether it's Harvard giving us a 4-year degree, or then McKinsey giving us a clear path up the ladder. In all of these formats, we've trained generation after generation to get better and better at execution and focus less on reimagination and constantly rethinking what should be done next. And I think those things are going to be much more important than they have ever been. And that is where I believe the biggest dislocation will happen, not necessarily because AI keeps getting better and better, but many of the support structures that used to be there to shepherd us along in our career
Yeah, a
will
career path or a career ladder. It's kind of,
exactly.
you're saying it's all being blown up, or
It's it's it's
it has been.
it's getting blown
Yeah,
up. It's certainly not
right.
going to be there in the same format. And that obviously affects the early workers the most. So they're sort of getting hit from both angles. They haven't even figured out how to navigate their careers, and a lot of their work is getting automated. So it's not one or the other, it's a confluence of both of those things. Workers who see this potentially have the ability to understand that there are other ways to reimagine themselves, but it hits the early career workers a lot more.
But is this any different than what we've been saying the last 10 years, that workers need to be resilient and have a growth mindset and be curious? And is this just that? Or is this that but on steroids? Like, this is happening faster and more dramatically, or is it something else?
I think it's certainly on steroids. The pace of improvement of technology is one, but the second is the fact that it's almost sort of consistently breaking a barrier. When the first version of ChatGPT came out, it couldn't do a lot of things, and it was stuck at knowledge from 2021. And today, it can do a whole lot of other things. The rate at which those capabilities have been improving, or the spectrum of work that they impact, have been changing dramatically. And I think the biggest thing when I talk to not just executives, but anybody in general, dinner conversations as well, is people feel uncertain about what is uniquely human anymore, because they kept on betting on this is something that AI can't do. And then they've seen AI do that to some extent. And so that expanding frontier is what creates uncertainty for them. That's the real issue.
I mean, it creates it for all of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what it is to be uniquely human. I guess for me, that's when I pick up my grandkid. That feels uniquely human. I should probably be doing more of that and less worrying about AI. Are we in a bubble? And if so, what should most of us do about it, if anything? What's your advice to leaders who are waiting for the bubble to burst, or when it bursts, if it does? What's your take?
I think we're absolutely in a bubble. The pace of narrative and hype outpaces the pace of technological shift, which outpaces the pace of organizational shifts. So we're absolutely in a bubble at the level of the narrative and hype. How far this technology in its current form will take us or not, the market is divided on that. You can see that in Google's stock price and the shifting narrative away from LLMs. I think there's sufficient momentum and capitalization to keep pushing for new improvements, not just through LLMs, but through other models. But we're absolutely in a bubble in terms of the amount of capitalization that's gone into the existing infrastructure and the organizational demand that is trying to feed into and build out. I think there's going to be a correction over there.
Next year?
I think the earlier that happens, the better it's there, because it corrects expectations across the market, and then it allows the right narratives to start taking hold. And maybe that's, it has its own gestation period, but unless that happens, we'll keep, swinging between this boom and doom, or AI can do everything, AI can do nothing. So
Yeah, no, I like that. That's good advice. Yeah, my advice is also to remember when the dot-com e-commerce bubble burst, which it did. Some of us are old enough to remember that. Amazon was ridiculed. Its stock price dropped 95%. Wall Street Journal labeled the company Amazon.bomb, and it was a tough couple of years for Amazon. They had to do layoffs, they had to cut costs, they had to become more efficient. But then they basically put their head down and executed for 10 years and stole market share from everybody. So my advice to leaders is don't get distracted. It will burst, and when it does, I think it's really what you're saying, the sooner the better in some respects. It'll clear out maybe the wannabes and the pretenders and the AI influencers in my LinkedIn feed. That'd be great. And maybe the real work starts with the people who are more serious about it. I think you're right, Sangeet. The sooner the better in that respect. Not just yet, though. I'm trying to raise a Series B. Let me get that done, then we'll burst the bubble. All right, Sangeet, last question. Advice for parents. I don't know if you have kids. Even if you don't, you're in this every day. You're in organizations, and you're advising a lot of people on how to navigate what's about to happen. And what's your advice to parents?
yeah, I do have an 8-year-old daughter. I have a 40-year-old sister who's out of a job because she used to do highly specialized translation, and AI can do that, and she has no way back. So, I mean, these are all very personal issues as well. And I'm thinking about that in terms of how it applies to my work as well. But really, for parents, I would say the one thing that kids need to know is learning how to learn and constantly being curious. I think curiosity has a compounding premium over time. It may not show up in the short term, but building that curiosity muscle and constantly asking questions, constantly being curious, constantly, scratching that itch, it not only helps you understand what you want to be and where you can uniquely contribute and have an unfair advantage, because I think that's going to be extremely important, especially if you want to be one of those superstars in the new economy, but also because it helps you take much more agency of your own path. So having that curiosity, asking questions, experimenting, learning, keep testing more often, keep developing better hypotheses, keep getting curious, that helps you identify what you want to be and how you can be better at it.
Okay, that's a more nuanced answer than I would give my grandkids. Don't cheat with GPT. Or just become a plumber. We have a plumbing problem at our new house in San Francisco, which we've owned 3 months, and the 2 quotes I got to fix this for 3 days of work range between $8,000 and $13,000. Maybe that's the better path. Sangeet, great to see you again.
Likewise.
Good luck in your travels. Good luck in your transformations and helping organizations reshuffle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, listen, I like to think high-low, and I think Sangeet offered us 2 pearls of wisdom, one high and one low. The high is at 30,000 feet, the strategy level. Let's not just automate. Let's rethink or reshuffle our business or our product or service. We really have to think AI natively, perhaps like a startup would, and reimagine our business, our product or service in the age of AI, with AI and with an AI-powered business model. And then low, more tactically, I liked his advice and his optimism for some of us, which is we'll become a lot more valuable if we're able to remix or reshuffle our own skills, perhaps combine 2 previously uncombined capabilities or skills to create a new output. It reminds me of what my last guest, Juliet Balin, said, that it's not really that hard if you have the ambition and are willing to make the effort to be in the top 5% of your class or of your team or of your industry, and those will be the most valuable humans. I kind of connect those 2 dots from Sangeet and from Juliet and encourage all of us to own that responsibility personally, to use these technologies and remix them in terms of our own capabilities and create something of greater value. Thanks for listening to AI True Serum. In the meantime, you can find me online at gregshove.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter, also called AI True Serum. If you got a second right now, leave us a rating or review. It'll be a big help to us and help other people find this show.